The Sikha we're learning this week is the Sikha of Shabbos Parshas Tazria Mitzoira Tafshin Nun Aleph. It can be found in Sefer HaSichos Tafshin Nun Aleph, Chelik Beis, page 490. Just want to point out that this is a Sikha that came very shortly, just over a week after the very famous Sikha of Chof Ches Nisan Tafshin Nun Aleph, the Sikha in which the Rebbe said, Tut alts was ihr kennt, do whatever you can to bring Mashiach. In fact, in the very beginning of this Sikha, the Rebbe seems to quite clearly be referencing to that Sikha. And in this particular Sikha, the Rebbe is giving us some very important highlights of what it is that in fact we can do to bring Mashiach now. So the Rebbe starts off in Seif Aleph, in continuation to that which has been discussed and emphasized very, very much recently, mamash, regarding the absolute need in every single Yid getting involved to do whatever he can to bring Mashiach Tzidkeinu b'poyel mamash, take it from Miyad mamash. And this again, of course, is the Sikha of Chof Ches Nisan, as is pointed out in the Ha'ara over here, as well as the Sikha of Shabbos Parsha Shmini, which came just a day or 2 days after the Sikha of Chof Ches Nisan, in which the Rebbe makes this point also very clear, that we need to, each and every one of us, do whatever we can to bring Mashiach. Says the Rebbe, because in these very, very days, with the end of Chodesh Nisan of the year of Hoya Tehei Shnas Arenu Neflois, so that means in the very last few days of Chodesh Nisan, which of course Chof Ches Nisan is part of that. So in the very last days of Chodesh Nisan is Kolu Kol HaKitzin, all the time frames, all the limits are up. And the Rebbe says over here, both the Kates Hayomim, the Kates Hayomin. Without getting into much detail right now, but regarding the concept of the Kates, of the end of days, there's two different expressions in Tanakh. One is called Kates Hayomim, with a mem at the end. The other one is Kates Hayomin, with a nun at the end. And in different places in Chassidus it explains how each one of these represent and signify another level in the Kates. But at these days we're mamish finished all of these Kitzim Kipshutei, mamish in the most literal sense, and therefore surely immediately Mashiach Tzidkeinu is coming, and so that each and every one of us could point with our fingers and say, Hine zem melech HaMashiach ba, behold, here comes Mashiach, and we would be able to say that he had already come in the past tense the moment before this one. So in connection to all of this, we need to explain the specific emphasis about the inyan of the Geula, and what each and every one of us could do about bringing the Geula, and how all of this is brought out in the various different things connected with this Shabbos Kodesh. First and foremost, the matters of Torah which are connected specifically to the Shabbos, that is the Parshas HaShavua, including the Parsha that we're going to start reading by Mincha, as well as the Pirkei Avos of the Shabbos, also connecting it to the general time, both as far as the month is concerned, as well as the days of Sphira, as all of this will be explained later. The Rebbe starts off in Seif Beis explaining the connection of the Parshas HaShavua, Parshas Tazria and Mitzoira, how this specifically emphasizes the inyan of the Geula. So the Rebbe starts off, what does Parshas Tazria speak about? The Parsha starts off, Isha ki Tazria v'yolda Zochar, a woman that will conceive and give birth to a Zochar, to a boy, to a male. So it's known that the whole concept of giving birth, v'yolda, is a hint to the idea of the Geula. As the Pasuk says, Yolda Tzion es boneha. Tzion gave birth to her children, a reference to the time of the Geula. Furthermore, giving birth to a boy, to a male, represents the strength of the Geula. The Geula HaMitis V'Ashlema, the everlasting and eternal Geula, after which there will be no Golus, is represented by the idea of a Zochar, a concept of strength. Similar to what says regarding the song that will be sung L'Asid Lavei, as opposed to Shirois that were in the past. So by Mashiach Tzidkeinu it's going to be Shir Chadosh, in the masculine term, Lashon Zachar, as opposed to Shira Chadasha. In a similar way over here, V'yolda Zachar, giving birth to a boy, is a hint on the birth, on the Hisgalus, on the revelation of the Neshama of Mashiach, which Mashiach himself comes from a very, very high level, known as the Alma Didchura, the masculine world. In other words, a very high and great and strong world. So we have over here immediately a remes to the Gula. More specifically, says the Rebbe, the words Isha ki sazriya, a woman that will conceive, is referring to the general avodah of Yidden. Yidden are called the Isha, Kavayachol, so to speak, the wife of Hashem. So in the time of Golus, the avodah of a Yid is compared to Tazriya, to sowing, to planting. As in another pasuk, Uzratiya li ba'aretz, the Eibishter says, I've planted the Yidden in the Eretz, in the ground, as well as another pasuk, Haboyim Yashreish Yaakov, the Yaakov takes root, like roots in the ground. So the avodah of Yidden in Golus is like planting and sowing. Sazriya, the Isha, the woman, the Yidden, are being Mazriya, are sowing, and through our avodah, throughout the whole time of Golus, Isha ki Sazriya, then what happens immediately following that, without any interruption, comes what grows out, the tzmicha, the yotzitzu porach Yisrael, as the pasuk goes on in the pasuk that we just mentioned, Aboim Yashresh Yaakov, that the Yidden flourish and blossom. But in this context, Isha ki sazriya v'yolda zachar, through the avodah of the Yidden, what comes out is immediately the geula amitis v'ashleima through Mashiach Tzedkenu, a geula after which there is no golus, hinted in the words v'yolda zachar. So to summarize, Isha ki sazriya is the Yidden doing their avodah in the time of golus. What comes out, v'yolda zachar, what comes out is the geula and Mashiach. So that's as far as Parshas Tazriya is concerned. Parshas Mitzoira, the Gemara says, the Gemara asks, what is the name of Mashiach? The Gemara mentions a number of different things, and amongst them, one of the things that the Gemara there is discussing and says, Chivra de Bei Rebbe Shmoi. The name of Mashiach is the Chivra. Chivra literally means the white one, the Mitzoira, from the household of Rebbe. What does a Mitzoira have anything to do with Mashiach and the name of Mashiach? So the Gemara says, we have a pasuk. The pasuk says, Achen cholyenu hu nasa. Speaking about Mashiach, it says that he carries our illness, umachayvenu sivlom, and he carries our pain. Va'anachnu chashavnu nagua muke elikim umu'una. We considered him, Mashiach, as plagued, as beaten by the Eibishter, oppressed. But really, what is it about? He's carrying our sins, our averis, our tzaros. The Gemara also says, My Simnei, in a famous story with Eliyahu Hanavi describing where Mashiach can be found. Well, the point of the story that's relevant over here is that when Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was asked Eliyahu Hanavi how he could identify Mashiach, so he says, Yosef b'nei Aniyeh is sitting amongst the poor people, Soiv lechaloyim, those that are suffering from all these illnesses, Minugoyim, as Rashi explains over there, that they are all also have plagued with tzaras, and he himself has the same thing, as the same pasuk that we just brought, V'hu mechoylul mipshainu, that he's paying because of our transgressions, because of our sins. And the pasuk of cholyenu hu nasa, that he carries our illness. So what's the Gemara saying over here? That there's a special connection between Mashiach being called a Mitzoira. More specifically, in the context of the parsha, what does the pasuk say? Zois tiyeh toiras ha-Mitzoira b'yom tarasi. This will be the laws of the Mitzoira when he becomes pure. In fact, many people have a minig not to call the parsha by the name Mitzoira, but the parsha of Tahara. So what does this all mean? Mitzoira represents how Mashiach is in the Golus, that even though Mashiach is such a perfect person, as the pasuk says, Yaskilav the Yorim Venisa V'Gavamoid, how great and intellectual and high and uplifted he's going to be, yet he's suffering because of all the tzoros of Golus. So that's what the Mitzoira represents. What does it mean, B'yoyim Ta'arasi, the day he becomes pure? When the Mitzoira is becoming pure from the tzaras, this is referring to Mashiach, when he reveals himself, takes out the Bnei Yisrael, B'ge'ula ha'amitis v'ashlema. So again, both in Parshas Tazria, we have the idea of Yidden doing their work, and V'yolda Zocher Mashiach, Ge'ula coming out. Parshas Mitzoira is again referring to Mashiach, B'yoyim Ta'arasoi, when he's finally pure of the tzaras, and we have the Ge'ula. The Rebbe asks in Seif Gimel, we need to understand. Number one, the connection between the two Parshas, Tazria and Mitzoira, which often they are read together, as this year. The question is, if we look at the names of the Parshas, Tazria and Mitzoira, they seem to be opposites. Tazria is the idea of conceiving, the idea of planting and growth, etc. On its own is connected to the whole idea of birth, as the pasuk says, Isha ki sazria v'yolda zachar. So there's the sazria, the sowing or the conception, and then immediately there's a birth. It's all about geula. On the other hand, Mitzoira, on its own, without the tahara, Mitzoira itself represents something the opposite of purity. You need to go ahead and do something to purify the Mitzoira. But the word Mitzoira itself, the idea of Mitzoira itself, seemingly is representing Golus, the pain of Golus. So how do you put these two parshas together? Tazria meaning Geula really, and Mitzoira in a sense meaning Golus, or Mashiach in the time of Golus, as we said before. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, number two, and this is even more important, if we look at the sequence of the parshas, first Tazria and then Mitzoira, the question is, if we have Tazria, that means we have already the Geula and a Zochar, a Geula after which there is no Golus. How does it now make sense to say to have Mitzoira, which is a concept associated with Golus? The Rebbe asks, point number three, within each one of these parshas itself, we really need to understand how the name of the parsha connects with and reflects the point of the parsha. Each one really is going to seem to be saying the opposite of the parsha. That is, Parshas Tazria, we said the name of the parsha represents Geula. Isha ki Tazria v'yolda, she's conceiving and having a child. But most of the parsha is actually speaking about the dinim of Tzaras, which we just explained. Tzaras is about Golus. So the name of the parsha is Geula, Tazria, whereas most of the parsha is speaking about Golus, Tzaras. In Parshas Mitzoira, the opposite is true. The name of the parsha, as it's called in Torah, Mitzoira, is Golus, whereas most of the parsha is speaking about how the Mitzoira is purified, which that represents Geula. So the name of the parsha is Golus, and the parsha is about Geula. The question is, if the name of the parsha is meant to express and emphasize what the parsha is about, it would have been l'cha'oira, seemingly more appropriate, that the parsha that speaks about Tzaras, that is Parshas Tazria, the idea that speak about Golus, it's this parsha, the first parsha, that should have been called Mitzoira. Whereas the second parsha, which is mainly speaking about the purification of the Mitzoira, which we translated as Geula, if anything, that's the parsha that should be called Tazria, which represents a concept of giving birth, of new growth, etc. And finally, question number 4, regarding the name of Mashiach. If Mashiach is all about being the redeemer of the Yidden, why is it that we emphasize in his name, and again a name represents what he's all about? Why do we call him by the name Mitzoira, which is in other words saying that we're focusing more on the Golus aspect rather than focusing on the Geula aspect within Mashiach? In order to understand this, the Rebbe says in Seif Daled, we're going to have a closer look on the whole idea of Negoyim, the whole idea of Tzaras. We're going to explain it al pi Chassidus, how it really represents a very, very high level. On the pasuk Adam ki yiyeh ba'or b'sari, that a person that will have in the skin of his flesh a spot of Tzaras, etc., it's explained in Likutei Torah that the word Adam, when it says a man over here, is actually representing someone that's on a very, very high level, on a perfect level. When we speak about this perfect person, that basically has fixed up all of his actions. It's still possible that something, a little minute thing, in, so to speak, the most external parts of his existence wasn't completely elevated yet, wasn't completely refined yet, and there's some sort of psoila, some sort of waste, some sort of negativity on a very external level left over. And this causes signs in the gashmias of his flesh, and that's what negoim, that's what saras is all about. Because we're speaking about a person that in the ruchnius and his avodas Hashem had taken care basically of all of his actions, basically refined all the bad from the good, from both from his body and from his nefesh. It's only as if a little bit of waste at the very edge of his existence, what's called the edge of his garments, was not refined yet, that little bit, and therefore an external sign, only on the external part of the person, on his skin, is there, representing that there's something little that he still needs to take care of. The Rebbe says we could explain this further by looking carefully at the words Adam ki yiyeh b'or b'sarei l'negat saras. First of all, it says, where is the spot b'or b'sarei, on the skin of his flesh? That means to say that not only isn't this blemish affecting the etzem, the very essence of the person, the inside of the person, and his veins, and all of these things, rather really, this spot is not even shaykh to the basar, not even to the flesh of the person. These are things that are changed and are affected by the person's eating and drinking that become part of his flesh and blood. So even that is also still not affected by this little minute little thing that a person still needs to take care of. Rather, what is affected? Only oir basari, not his flesh, not his basar, but only the skin over his flesh. That means it's something surrounding and outside of his flesh. Furthermore, what does the pasuk say about the spot? Adam ki yiyeh b'or b'sarei. If it will happen on the skin of his flesh that he has this spot. That means it's not a regular thing, it's not a common thing, it's something unusual that occurred. Furthermore, the pasuk says negat saras. The word nega could also be, besides meaning an affliction, etc., could also be from the lashon of negia, which means just a touch. In other words, even this negative thing that we said is not really affecting his essence, only his chitzonius. Even that is not really part of his chitzonius, part of his skin. It's only as if something that touched him, but really not part of himself. So what are we saying? In other words, that we're speaking about a person that has this negat saras. We're speaking about a person that's really on a very, very high level. There's just something very, very external and little that affects him that he needs to take care of, that he needs to fix up. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe says in Lekutei Torah, really these level of these negoim, of these spots, of these afflictions, are really a very, very high ruchni yizdika level. Which is first of all seen by the fact that the person actually doesn't become tamei automatically when these spots appear. It's only once the kohen comes along and says he's tamei. But as long as the kohen didn't say he's tamei, these negoim are not in any way tamei whatsoever. In fact, they represent a very, very high spiritual oil, a spiritual energy, but they are called dinokashia of kedusha. In other words, it's a matter of gevuros, it's a matter of severity and harshness, but within kedusha. Still some level of kedusha, a very high level, which, as we'll soon see, some negativity can come out of it. But in the meantime, it actually is still a very high and powerful level of kedusha, as the Rebbe will soon explain. Says the Rebbe in Sif Hey, these two inyanim, these two ideas, that on the one hand, these spots represent only some sort of little inyan that the person needs to take care of, something very, very external. On the one hand, still something negative at the end of the day. On the other hand, we're saying they represent very, very high oiris, very great energies. Now that seems to be two opposites. One is saying that something negative, even as minute as it may be, on the other hand, you're saying it's very great oiris, are really dependent on each other. That is, Since these negoim, since these spots are in essence something very, very high, therefore, even if something negative ends up coming out of it, through something called Yenikas Achitzoinim, that the klipos end up getting some of this energy, it ends up in the wrong place, as the Rebbe will soon give some examples for that. It ends up being something very external, something very minute, something, as we said before, just like a little touch, only in the external garments. And therefore, the Rebbe explains, how do we fix this up? How does the Mitzvah become pure? It's not like we have to introduce something new completely, since in essence, we're actually speaking about something that's coming from a very, very high source. So what we need to do is to reveal what are these negoim, what are these spots really all about, to reveal how they're in essence such great oyros, and then it will be transformed. We'll see the real thing, what it's all about. This is hinted in the words, Zoistiyeh Toiras HaMetzoyra, this will be the law of the Metzoyra, B'yoyim Ta'aroseh, literally on the day that he becomes pure. But we could also explain that it means that how does he become Ta'aroseh, how does he become pure? Through Yoim. Yoim representing light, revelation, as in the pasuk Vayikra Elokim Lo Oir Yoim. In other words, when you reveal what these energies are really all about, what these spots are really about, that they're really such high and great oiros, that automatically negates all of the klipos, that automatically gets rid of any sort of negativity, even in a chitzoniistic way, and in that way, the Mitzvah becomes pure. To explain this further, the Rebbe says it's Ivov. The whole reason why there could be a situation where klipos might be receiving some of this energy, to the extent that the person ends up being the opposite of tahor in a revealed way. Coming from these great oiros, if he's speaking about something so high and so great, how do you end up with something so negative? The reason is because you have such great oiros, such great energies that can't actually be contained within the vessels, within the kalim. To use the terminology of Chassidus, you have something called Oiros de Toyu. The world of Toyu is a world where there are tremendously high, great energies, but it cannot come down and clothe itself into the kalim, into the vessels of the world of Tikkun, the world of Atzilus, etc., the lower worlds, which are more limited. Based on all of this, because of these high Oiros, eventually there was something called Shviras HaKelim. It was too much oil, so there was something called the Shviras HaKelim, where these vessels broke, as it were, and eventually all sorts of negativity came because of that. To explain this in a person's avodah, in his service to the Eibishter, when a person has this very, very great, intense energy, an energy that doesn't come down into a keli, into a vessel, what this brings out by a person is something called rotzui, an idea of klois hanefesh, a feeling of a tremendous yearning to get close to the Eibishter, to the extent where the neshama is ready to leave the body. The neshama is sort of getting removed from these kalim, from the vessels, from the body. That it should not come downwards, shine downwards, rather wanting to go higher and higher and closer to Hashem. The problem, however, is when a person is just focusing on going higher and higher and removing himself from what his job is down here in this world, from this there could be something called Yenikas HaChitzonim. The klipos could also get involved and start getting their chayas. That is, the idea of shuv, which is the opposite of rotzui, would mean that the person is getting involved and doing inyanim of kedusha in this world. In the context of what the Rebbe is speaking about over here, the kalim, the vessels, would be a person being involved in saying oisius of Torah, of tefillah, oisius of kedusha. Those are the kalim, those are the vessels to hold this great oil. But when a person is just getting all excited and not actually internalizing and taking these oiris and doing something with it, he only has this rotzi, then something negative could come out called Yenikas HaChitzonim. An example the Rebbe gives. A person is all excited in davening, a great fire, a great rotzui, a great klois hanefesh. But if he doesn't translate that after his davening, sitting down and learning some Torah, then what could end up with all of that excitement and fire is that it could end up turning out and translating itself into things as anger, as bearing grudges, and other things like that. And from that could go further to become a yesh, that the person should feel himself as a separate entity outside of Hashem, haughtiness, etc., etc. So again, to summarize, if a person only has the idea of rotzu, like the idea of oiros to toyu, just these great energies, but if you don't actually do anything with it, bringing it down into a keli, into something that can hold on to it, then it could end up in something very negative. And therefore, the eights are the advices. The Razal tell us, Im rotz libcha shuv le'echod. Your heart is running, excited, ablaze. Shuv le'echod, return to echod. What does that mean? After the rotzui, once you have all of this excitement, there needs to be a concept of shuv, of returning, which is a concept of bittul. What does this mean, an inyan of bittul? The Rebbe explains that a person feels himself, rather doesn't feel himself, he feels that he's absolutely no metzius, almost like a stone, like a silent stone. The example for this would be like a person standing, a servant standing in front of the king. When he's standing right in front of the king, he has absolutely no koyach left. He's like non-existent. He's completely bottled, completely nullified. And davka, because of the bittul, he recognizes that there's a job to be done. What does the Eibishter want from me? The Eibishter wants that I should get down into the kelim. I should get involved in learning the Torah or doing the mitzvah or whatever it is. Not just staying with this high, great excitement. And it is davka through this that the Eibishter's purpose in creating the world, the Dira B'Tachtoinim, is fulfilled. So what we have from this is that the shuv, this return that comes after the ratzui, is to take those great high oiros, which on their own might be higher than the kalim. These oiros are more an idea of ratzui, of getting you all excited, of leaving this world, but instead you take these same oiros, these same energies, and it's about bringing them into the kalim. That's what shuv is all about. How do you do this? How do you manage to sort of combine these two opposite modes together, ratzui and shuv? Or also known as ha'ala and amshacha, going up and coming down. Or, in a broader sense, this is really what chesed and gevura is all about. It's also these two opposite modes. In order to do this, you need something that's higher than both of them together. And that is the sphera called Tiferes, which causes a blend between the Chesed and Gevura because it comes from a higher place. It comes from Keser, which is even higher than the whole Seder Ishtalshalos. That could put together these two opposite modes of Chesed and Gevura, or the two modes of Ha'ala and Amshacha, going upwards or coming down, or Ratzui and Shuv. The idea being that you're taking these very, very high, great Oiros, which are higher than the Kalim, and they too should be able to come down into the Kalim. Says the Rebbe, this is the pshat of what's happening by the Mitzorah. When we speak about the Taras HaMitzorah, the purification of the Mitzorah, we said, Zois ti et Toiras HaMitzorah beyoim Torasoi. This is the law, this is the Torah of the Mitzorah when it becomes pure. Why do we use the expression Toiras HaMitzorah? Why don't we say Taras HaMitzorah, the purification of the Mitzorah? What we're trying to say over here is the way to fix up the issue with the Mitzorah is through Torah. Because first of all, the Rebbe explains the whole idea of the way Torah needs to be learned is with bitul. As we say in davening, v'nafshi ka'ofer lakol tiyah, when our souls are like dust, when we feel ourselves humble and small, psach libi b'seira sechel, then we are a vessel for the Torah. What is Torah? Torah is this level that we were speaking about, something that's higher than Ishtalshalos. This concept of Tiferes, something that could blend all the opposites and bring them together. As the Razal tells us, the Gemara says on a pasuk we say every day in davening, L'chashem Agdula V'Gevura V'Tiferes. Tiferes, the Gemara says, refers to Matan Torah. Tiferes is Torah. And that's why it has the ability to combine these two opposite modes of Ratzui and Shuv. Meaning to say that even these very, very great and high energies should be able to come down and reveal themselves in the Kalim. And based on this, once you have that the Oiris are settled in Kalim, not like we said before, if the Oiris are out of the Kalim, if a person is just having this great passion and it ends up nowhere, it can go to the negative places. But when you bring down the Oiris in the proper Kalim, now there is no room anymore for the Yenikas HaChitzonim, for any of the Klipos to get sustenance, and to have a situation the opposite of purity, because now these great Oiros, which as we said, that's really what the Negoim are all about, that's what the root is, are now coming down where they're supposed to, down into the Kalim, and in that way the Metzora is pure. Just summarize again the main points that we spoke over here about the Metzora and what it represents, because it's going to be very relevant to understand the continuation of the Sikh and the whole concept of Golus and Gula. So what the Rebbe was saying is, on the one hand we're speaking about a very, very high oir, but if it's just a high oir and it doesn't go anywhere, something negative could come out of it. And that's what happens by the Metzora. We're saying on the one hand it's a high oir, but it comes out as something negative. How are you going to fix it up? Toiras HaMetzora. You get to a level that's higher than Ishtalshlus. You get to the level of Torah. It has the ability to bring down these high oiris, these high passions and energies, and bring them down to the place where they're meant to be, so there shouldn't be any negativity. Says the Rebbe in Seif Zayin, now we can understand regarding the whole concept of Golus and Gula, which we said before. The Metzora represents the idea of Golus, and the purity of the Metzora is the idea of Gula. Golus, on the one hand, is all about a Helim v'Hester, a concealment of the godly light. As the Pasuk says, we don't see miracles and wonders, etc. Furthermore, it's a great darkness, especially the extra double and redoubled darkness of the end of Golus. But where is it coming from? Again, from a very, very high source. Like the idea of these great oiros, these great lights and energies that are too high, they're higher than Kalim. They're completely higher than revelation. So we say loira inu, I say seinu loira inu, that we can't see it, but it's dafka because it's so high and so great. As the Pasuk says, Yoshes choshech sisra, the Eibishter is hiding, so to speak, in the darkness, but it's a darkness that's greater than light. However, because of it's so high and so great that it's higher than revelation, down here in this world it translates itself as a darkness in the literal sense, and all the negative things of Golus come out of it. However, since in its root, in essence, really, it's what's really happening in the time of Golus is that there's a light that's greater than any sort of Gili. It's such a high oir that cannot be revealed. So therefore, even when it ends up coming down into something negative, in a darkness in the literal sense, to things that are the opposite of purity, etc., we must always realize that is only external. Like the Metzora we said, it's only on the lowest and the most distant and external level. It's only a touch. Really, in essence, what's going on, it remains always pure, holy, and good, etc. And therefore, just like we said by the Metzora, that it's really about revealing that in essence it's good, and that the source of it is light and good, in a similar way over here, through our actions and avoid in the time of Golus, what are we doing? It's not that we are suddenly bringing in a whole new idea into the world, the idea of Gula. Rather, it's about revealing what the Golus was really all about. As to be understood also from the fact that what are we doing? It's not about negating the Golus. It's about transforming the Golus into the Gula. As the famous concept that it's about bringing the Aleph, which represents the Eibishter, Alufei Shalolim, the boss of the world, bringing the Eibishter into Goyla, which is the Golus, and that way transforming the Goyla, the Golus, into Gula. So in other words, we're taking and we're revealing that these oiros, that these energies are really something so high and so great, and through our avoid in the time of Golus, we are now causing that these oiros, these energies, these lights that on their own are so high that could not be revealed, yet through our avodah we are bringing it down into this world. And in that way, just like by the Metzora, once you manage to bring these high oiros into the Kalim, down to this world, there's no room anymore. There's no chance anymore for any concealments, for any darkness, for any sorts of negativity, even in an external way. The Rebbe explains, via Shloimeh, we could say that the special advantage of our actions and avodah in the time of Golus that brings about that these great oiros should be able to become revealed down here in this world comes specifically because of the bittul and the mesiras nefesh, which is primarily in the time of Golus. And through the bittul and the mesiras nefesh that comes from the yechidah of the Yid, which is connected to the Eibishter, to the Yachid, to the one and only, the way the Eibishter is hired in all of Seder Ishtalshalus. And it is dafka because of this deep level of the yechidah, the mesiras nefesh, and so on, the bittul, that is what could combine even these opposites of Rotzi v'Shuv, that even these highest oiros could come down into Kalim. Says the Rebbe in Sif Ches, now we can understand the connection between Parshas Tazria and Mitzoira, which we said before. One represents Golus and one represents Gula. In fact, in the opposite order, we said in the names at least. The Tazria seems like Gula and Mitzoira is Golus. We spoke about the idea also that seemingly a parsha of Tazria, which is seemingly about Gula, and yet most of the parsha speaks about Negoim, which is Golus. And the way they become purified in Parshas Mitzoira. How does this all work together? So the Rebbe explains, since the Gula is not something separate and distinct from the Golus, rather it's about revealing what the real inyan of the Golus was all about. Similar to the Mitzoira that we said, it's about revealing what the real idea of that saras, of that spot, was all about. So therefore the system and the names of the Parshias, what's happening over here is, and the beginning of the Parsha is that after we have a general introduction for both Parshias, starting off with the words Isha ki sazriya v'yolda zocher. This pasuk tells us about the general avodah of what's happening in Golus. That we have a situation of Tazriya, we're planting, we're sowing, and that our avodah brings about, v'yolda zocher brings about the ultimate geula, after which there is no Golus. After all of this, after this general introduction, comes the details of the Parshas. So first of all, we have a Parshas Tazriya, which Tazriya we really said, Tazriya means Gula. But what are we speaking about? We're speaking about the Negoim, about the Tzaras, about the Golus. Why is that? Because as we just said, even the Parsha of Geula, of Tazriya, how could it speak about Tzaras? Because Tzaras itself really is such high, great oiros. And as we explained, that even once it comes down, it's only remains something very external by the person. And the whole idea is that these great oiros will be revealed down here by the Gula. We'll see how really amazing these oiros were. Then in Parshas Mitzoira, which is a parsha technically about Golus, that's what Mitzoira is. And yet, what's the whole parsha speaking about? The Mitzoira becoming pure, in other words, the idea of Geula, because, as we explained, the way that Tzaras is going to become pure is by revealing what it was really all about. In the context of Golus and Geula, it's revealing what was really going on in the Golus. It's really about the Geula. So, in other words, the whole idea of Geula is really the idea of Mitzoira, but in the positive sense of the Mitzoira, in the high level that the Mitzoira is. And furthermore, it's in such a way that now there is no ability even for anything negative, because as we said, all of these greatest oiros are being revealed and coming down into this world, and that's why we're going to have the everlasting Geula, after which there is no Golus, the concept of the Yolda Zocher. The Rebbe says, we could connect all of this also with the beginning of the parsha that we're about to read, Mincha of the Shabbos, which is Parshas Acharei Kedoshim. So Parshas Acharei, in which we have the command, the prohibition, that there shouldn't be a Ratzui without a Shuv. There shouldn't be this idea of a Klois HaNefesh, of the Neshama leaving the body, as it was by the two sons of Aaron that got a bit too close to Hashem and they passed away. Instead, the Parsha tells us there needs to be Ratzui and Shuv together, Dafka, both of them. In other words, you have a Neshama that on the one hand wants to go up higher and higher, but it needs to remain in the Guf. Now the guf on its own is the one that wants to go down and remain down. That's the idea of shuv. But it's about combining these two energies together, the rotzoi and the shuv, the neshama and the body. And in fact, of course, the ultimate everlasting life, the way it's going to be, la'asid lavoi, well, we're going to have eternal life. And the Rebbe immediately adds in the brackets over here, in the parentheses, and in our generation, this is, of course, without any interruption in between, going straight from life in this world, straight into the eternal life of Mashiach, and specifically physical life in a physical body. And as it says that la'asid lavoi, in fact, the neshama is going to get its sustenance from the guf. And this is, of course, the idea of combining the rotzi and the shuv, that yearning from the neshama, together with the shuv of the body. The same idea as we spoke before, these great oiros coming down into the kelim. Just want to point out over here one ha'ara, one footnote, regarding this, that the Rebbe says that in our generation we move on straight from the life in this world into the eternal life of the Gula. We know there is a concept that it says el ofar toshuv, that a person needs to return to dust. But the Rebbe says over here in Ha'ara 58 that this specific inyan of el ofar toshuv could be accomplished in a spiritual way through the idea of the nafshi ka'ofar lakol tiyeh, by being as humble as the dust. And therefore it doesn't necessarily need to be in a gashmiistic way. Continuing the Sikha now, the Rebbe says, how does this happen that we have the neshama and the guf, the rotzoi and the shuv coming together, which is what Parshas Acharei is telling us? That comes because of a level that's higher than both together. And that's represented by Parshas Kedoshim. What does Parshas Kedoshim tell us and give us the koyach to do? Kedoshim tiyu ki kadeshani. You should be holy, the Eibishter says to us, because I'm holy. What is that telling us? That as Yidden are in a physical world, in a place where we need to be warned to be holy, and as it's explained that what does holy mean? To be separated. We need to be warned to be separated from the gashmis, the things of the world. Yet the Yid remains pure and holy, and the greatest holiness, similar to the holiness of the Eibishter, as the Chazal tell us, Yachol kamoini, Talmud loymar ki kadeshani. Interesting. Often the way we understand those words meaning, as it's in a way of a question, Yachol kamoini, you might think you could be as holy as me. Talmud loymar, the pasuk says, ki kadeshani, I am holy, implying you can't be the same level of holiness as me. But Chassidus translates it, Yachol kamoini, as a statement, not as a question. Yachol kamoini. Every single Yid could kavayachol, so to speak, be on the same level of Kedusha as Hashem. Says the Rebbe, this is all even more emphasized in the name of Mashiach. This idea that we were speaking about is even more emphasized in the name of Mashiach. How is that? Mashiach is the Goyel, the Redeemer of the Yidden. And yet, what are we calling him? We're calling him Mitzoira. We said earlier in the Sikha that Rebbe quoted the Gemara, the Mitzoira from the household of Rebbe. And the Gemara that speaks about Mashiach sitting amongst the poor people that are suffering, that have tzaras, and so does he. So what are we saying over here? Mashiach, in other words, is in the world, in a place of Golus, in a state of Golus, in a situation of Golus, suffering all the problems of Golus, as the Gemara goes on to say. Omar Rav says, Imin Chayahu, if Mashiach is from those people that are alive, then who is it? It's Rabbeinu HaKadosh. It is the author of the Mishnah Rebbe. Why is it Rabbeinu HaKadosh? So Rashi explains, because he was someone that suffered tremendously, v'chasid gamur hava, and he was an absolute chassid, a pious person. So what is Mashiach doing? He's in the state of Golus. He's waiting, anticipating, impatiently to be able to reveal himself from this concealment of Golus, to be able to reveal himself as Melech HaMashiach, redeeming the Yidden beGeula Amitis V'Ashleima, with a complete Geula, after which there is no Golus. As the Rambam paskins, Yamoid Melech Mi Beis David, a king will get up from the house of David, etc., etc. I think it's important over here to look at a few of the footnotes, a few of the ha'aras. So first of all, number 66. in the Sikha itself, the Rebbe brought the Gemara about if Mashiach is from those that are alive today. So the Rebbe says that the Rambam paskins v'im yamoid melech mi beis David. So clearly we're speaking about someone that is already a king, and this is the person that's now going to come as Mashiach. In Ha'ara 67, very, very interesting Ha'ara, very interesting footnote, when it says over here that certainly this is Rabbeinu HaKadosh, so the Rebbe brings a famous Gemara that says that the Vei Rab Shiloi Amri, in the yeshiva of Rab Shiloi, they said, Shiloi Shmoi, the name of Mashiach is Shiloi. And they brought a pasuk, Ad Ki Yavoi Shiloi. In the yeshiva of Rabbi Yanai, they said Yinoin Shmoi. Rashi says that Yinon is like Yanai. And Rashi says, Kol Echad Hoya Doireish Achar Shmoi. And in the footnote, in the asterisk on the bottom of the star, the Rebbe says, an interesting thing, that Kol Echad Hoya Doireish Achar Shmoi, it doesn't say that the Talmidim came up with this idea that Mashiach's name is like their Rebbe's name, but rather that the Rebbe himself would darshan and speak about that the name of Mashiach is like his own name. And the Rebbe goes on in the footnote in 67, bringing the pasuk about why Mashiach's name is Yanai or Yinoin, a pasuk Yishmoi Elo'olam L'fnei Shemesh Yinoin Shmoi. Then the Gemara goes on to speak about in the yeshiva of Rabbi Chanina, they said Chanina was his name. Again a pasuk is brought. V'yesh oimrim Menachem ben Chizkiya Shmoi. Some say his name is Menachem ben Chizkiya, and again in the footnote, the Rebbe brings a version where it just says Menachem Shmoi. And again a pasuk is brought, Ki rochak mimeni Menachem meishiv nafshi. So there's all these different yeshivas, each one saying and explaining how the name of the Rebbe is connected with Mashiach. And the Rebbe then goes on and says, brings from his father, from Lekutei Levi Yitzchak, how really all of these opinions are Elu v'Elu Divrei Elokim Chayim, how all of these opinions are true. It's not like it's one or the other, but rather there's an inyan of Mashiach that's related to each one of these aspects of these different names, etc. And then the Rebbe concludes this footnote and says, Va'anan Chasidim, and we Chasidim, we follow their example, the example that's brought in the Gemara regarding our Rabbeim, and specifically regarding Kvoid Kedushas Moiri V'chami Admur Nesido Ireinu. And the Rebbe goes on to explain the names of the Frierdiker Rebbe, how they are all connected to the Gula. And the Rebbe says, Yosef Shmoi, that the name of Mashiach is Yosef, as in the Pasuk. Yosef ad Neshenis Yodi v'Asaf Nitchei Yisrael. And also Yitzchak Shmoi, as in the Pasuk, Az Yimalei Schoik Pinu. Still in the footnotes, on this idea that we're saying that Mashiach is suffering the pain of Golus, the Rebbe brings a very famous Gemara as well, in the story that was mentioned before with Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi asking Eliyahu Hanavi where he could find Mashiach, and he told him amongst the poor people, those with tzaras, etc. So the Gemara brings over there that Mashiach, that he was meeting at the gates of Rome, etc. So the siman for him, different, how he was different to all the other poor people that were suffering, is that the way he would take care of his bandages was undoing one and then redoing it, the bandage, and then dealing with the next bandage, etc., etc., rather than dealing with all of his wounds and undoing all the bandages at one time. The reason is, the Gemara says, and Rashi explains, is because he's waiting so impatiently to take the Yidden to the Geula that he doesn't want to hesitate. He doesn't want to have to take the time as much as it would take to bandage 2 bandages at a time. This is just another Gemara showing us this idea of how impatiently Mashiach is waiting to take the Yidden out of Golus. Says the Rebbe in Sif Tes, all of this is connected to the second Perek in Pirkei Avos that we learned this Shabbos, which starts off with the words Rebbe Yomer. Rebbe says, Eizehi derech yishara, what is the straightforward path sheyavar lo ya'adam, that a person should choose for himself, kol she tiferes lo yiseh, anything that is beautiful for for the one who does it, v'tiferes lo min adam, and beautiful also as far as other people are concerned. What's the connection to what we were speaking about? So the Rebbe says we'll understand this by first examining our Mishnah closely. First of all, what does it mean, Ezehi derech yeshara? What is the straight path? We have a clear pasuk, Yesharim darchei Hashem, the ways of Hashem, those are the straight paths for a Yid. Second of all, we use the expression sheyavar loy ha'adam. Now earlier on in the Sikha, when we're speaking about the idea of Mitzoira, we quoted from the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah that the word Adam represents someone that's already on a very, very high level, on a perfect level. So the question is, why over here is the term Adam being used? What is the straight path that an Adam should choose for himself? Finally, point number 3, the connection to the one who said it, Rebbe Omer, which is Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the author of the Mishnah. Why is it that he's referred to over here as Rebbe, rather than as Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, as he's mentioned and called in the very, very next Mishnah? Why is he called over here just plain by the name Rebbe? So the Rebbe is explaining the Mishnah now in the context of his Galus and Bias HaMashiach. And this is what the Rebbe explains, how the Rebbe explains the Mishnah. Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, he is the one who we said before about, if Mashiach's from those that are alive today, surely this is Rabbeinu HaKadosh, because of the amount of suffering that he's having and what kind of pious person he is. So even though he's a complete chassid, he finished his avodah, and yet he's suffering the sufferings and pain of Golus, and like Mashiach. And as we said before, what's Mashiach called? The Mitzoira from the house of Rebbe. That is, that Mashiach, even though he's so perfect, yet he's suffering all the problems of the Golus. What is Rebbe saying? What is the straight path that a person should choose? So this is the way it's explained. Ha'adam, we said before, means a person that's perfect already. So he did all of his actions, he refined everything he had to refine, and like by the Mitzoira, there's just a little bit something remaining, very external, that needs to be taken care of. How is that? Because at the end of the day, we're still in Golus. Because of the idea of Golus. That's like Rebbe. So Rebbe is a perfect person, but because of Golus, there's still something in the world that needs to be taken care of. The Rebbe says in our generation, being that we are the last generation in Golus, the very end of Golus, Ikvus of the Mashiach, when everything has been completed already that had to be done in the time of Golus. So the Rebbe says now all the Yidden are on this darga. Basically the avodah has been complete, everything is perfect already. If that's the case, the question of our Mishnah is, since everything of the time of Golus has been completed, what is the derech hayeshara? What is that perfect, straight way, the easiest way from amongst all the other inyanim and Torah, that a person, again in this context, means that all of Bnei Yisrael, someone that finished already all matters of avodah, what do we need to do now to bring about the revelation and coming of Mashiach? Interesting, just to note in Ha'orah 74, the Rebbe says, first of all, this starts with revealing the Mashiach inside of each and every one of us. So it's a double question. How do we reveal the Mashiach inside of us, as well as, of course, the general Mashiach for Klal Yisrael? And the answer to the Mishnah is, Kol shei tiferes lo yiseo v'tiferes lo min adam. What does this mean? Tiferes, we said before already, is Torah. Because of the greatness of Torah, we said before, it has the power to combine the two opposites of Ratzui and Shuv. Ratzui is about getting closer and closer and closer to the Eibishter. And that's what we would call Tiferes Lo Yiseh. It is beautiful for the man who's doing it. He's in a state, in a situation where he's getting closer to the Eibishter. What can be more beautiful than that? But at the same time, there's a shuv. There's also coming into the world. That's why it's Tiferes Lo Min Adam. It's also beautiful as far as the world is concerned. It's the same idea that we said before, the oiros coming into the kelim. And in that way, that's the way we reveal what the Golus was really all about, these great oiros of the Golus. And we said before that once we reveal what it's all about, and we can bring these oiros into the kelim, now there's no room for Golus at all anymore. So we have the Geula, after which there is no Golus. To clarify a little bit more the reason why Torah, Tiferes, is the straightforward path to bring about the revelation and coming of Mashiach. We can understand this based on what's known, that in Mashiach himself we know there's two aspects. There's the Melech aspect, he's called Melech HaMashiach, and he's also a Rav, so he's a king and a teacher. He's going to teach all the Yidden Torah. The difference is, the Melech aspect of Mashiach represents what Mashiach gives us in a way, what's called in a way of Makif. It's something so high and so great. The way we receive it is through Kabbalah soil. We accept his Malchus, we accept his kingdom, and we accept all of these high, great Inyanim that he's giving us. What does a teacher mean? A teacher means when you're giving over something b'pnimi, something that he can accept and absorb in an internal way, to the extent that we say that one who teaches somebody else Torah, it's as if he gave birth to him. Combining these two things together, the Melech, the king, and the Rav, the Makif and the Pnimi, represents the same point that we were speaking about, taking these very, very great Oiros, something that's so high that remains only Makif, surrounding on the outside, and yet they should come down in a Pnimiistic way, in an internal way, into the Kalim, and all of this happens, as we said before, through what? Through the Inyan of Tiferes, through the Inyan of Torah. Says the Rebbe in Seif Yud. We could connect this also to the whole idea of Chodesh Iyar. Chodesh Iyar is the second month. It's the month when we start doing the Avodah Milmata L'mayla, going upwards from below. In Chodesh Nisan, we had a Gilead revelation from above, great Nisan happening to the Yidden. Nisan. The Eibishter himself revealing himself to the Yidden and taking them out of Golus. It's a Chodesh of Gula. It's a Gula going out of all limitations. Iyar, on the other hand, is our work going upwards. Says the Rebbe, when we have Nisan and Iyar coming one after the other, this emphasizes again the connection between these two sorts of modes. On the one hand, we have the great Oiros of Chodesh Nisan, and yet they come into a Pnimius, into the Kalim in Chodesh Iyar, because of the Avodah of the Yid going Milmata L'mayla. And the koyach to combine both of these things together, once again, is because we're going to a level that's higher than both of them. And the Rebbe says, this is emphasized in the Sphira of Beis Iyar. This is sort of the bridge going over from the days of Nisan, from Rosh Chodesh, and now going into the specific days of Chodesh Iyar. So the first day is Beis Iyar. What's Beis Iyar? The Sphira of Tiferes Shebet Tiferes. It's through the Sphira of Tiferes, as we explained before. Tiferes is a combination, because it comes from such a high level, it could combine the two opposites of Rotzui and Shuv, the great Oiros, into the Kalim, and this is accomplished through the days of Beis Iyar, which is not only Tiferes, but Tiferes Shebet Tiferes. As the Rebbe points out in footnote number 81, it's even more emphasized by the fact that Beis Iyar is, of course, the Yom Haledes of the Rebbe Maharash, which had the attitude of Lechatchila Ariber. He's the one that gave us the koyach to have Lechatchila Ariber. And here again, the Rebbe explains it's sort of the same idea, that on the one hand, we're down here in this world, Kalim, but yet we're going higher than limitations, Lechatchila Ariber. The Rebbe continues in the Sikha. Since all of the great Giluyim of Chodesh Nisan, of Chodesh of Gula, are coming down through Avodas Adam, in other words, it's not just remaining somewhere up there, but it's coming into the Kalim through the Avodah of the person, that negates any possibility of Golos, and therefore we have the Geula Nitzchas, the everlasting Geula, after which there is no Golos. Furthermore, Iyar we know as Rosh Tevis Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Rachel, which it says in Sfarim, they represent the four legs of the Merkava of the chariot. What's the idea? The Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, three of the legs of the Merkava, they are Chesed, Gvura, and Teferes. It's explained in many places that represents the concept of Oyer, of the Mashpia. That's the levels of Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, is a great Oyer coming down. Rachel, on the other hand, which represents the idea of Malchus, Knesset Yisrael, etc. The fourth leg of the Merkava, which brings the completion of the Merkava, represents the Kalim, the recipient. Again, putting the two together in the Rosh Tevis of Iyar, we have both Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, which are the idea of the Mashpia, the Oyer, as well as the Makabel, Malchus, the Kalim, again represents putting these two things together, the great Oyros, along with the Kalim. The Rebbe says we could add that Rachel specifically represents the tremendous milo, the tremendous advantage that comes because of all of our avoid in the time of Golus, to bring the Geula. We know the famous pasuk, Rachel mevako al boneh, Rachel is crying for her children, ki einenu. Now what does this word ki einenu mean? Einenu means, seemingly it's speaking about the children because they are not around. But einenu is in singular. So it says in the Zohar that it's referring to the Eibishter, because the Eibishter, Kavayachol, has removed himself in the time of Golus, and he's higher and higher and cannot be found. But through Rachel's crying in the time of Golus, which really represents the avoid of all the Yidden, Rachel represents Knesset Yisrael. That brings the Geula, as the pasuk says, Yesh Sachar L'Pul Lasech V'Shavul Bonim L'Gvulam, that because of Rachel's avodah, and so too because of the Yidden's avodah, this brings the reward, this brings the Geula, so that these great oiros, the way Hashem is higher and higher, and so removed, which is really what's happening in Golus, it's a very great oir, but it's just too high to be revealed, and now they are going to be drawn down into this world, which will make sure that there shouldn't be any room anymore for Yenikas HaChitzoyim, for any klipos, to have any shaykhs, any connection. As in the pasuk, Rachel lefnei goyzeh ne'elamo, which literally means Rachel is a sheep. Before the shearers that are cutting off its wool, it stays silent over there. Rachel could also be understood as Rachel Imenu, and as Knesset Yisrael, and as Malchus, which in Chassidus and Kabbalah it explains this is the idea that Malchus is, there are certain, the klipos are sort of taking from the hairs, from the wool, so to speak, from Malchus, taking from those koiches of Malchus and feeding off it. So that's the idea of Golus. But as we just explained, once we have the oiros, the great oiros, coming down into the kalim, this negates the ability for any of these klipos, and the ability to be anything that's not pure. The time of Golus, the idea of Nagoyim, and on the contrary, we have the Geula, after which there is no Golus. The Rebbe now goes ahead and see if Yud Aleph and connects this with a specific day in Sfiras HaOmer that the Rebbe was saying this Sikha, which is the day of Malchus Shebet Tiferes. But first the Rebbe prefaces by saying the following. In Sfiras HaOmer, we go from Chesed Shebe Chesed to Malchus Shebe Malchus. So this obviously includes all matters of Avodah, which we called before, Ma'aseinu V'Avodaseinu, all of our Avodah in the time of Golus. When we say all of the avodah, both in regard to the person's own nefesh, and as we say in the tefillah, in Sfiras HaOmer, we say it's about l'sakenes nafsheseinu, to fix up our souls, v'rucheseinu, v'nishmoseinu, to purify us, to make us holy, but also impacting the whole world. As we say in the same Ribono Shel Olam, we say yushpa shefarav, it should bring down a great abundance of energy, etc. B'chol oilamos. So of course, when we have our avodah perfect, we are doing our avodah, fixing up both ourselves and the rest of the world. That of course brings about the geula amitis v'ashleima, the ultimate geula after which there is no golus. And as we say in Sfiras HaOmer, harachamon, hu yachzur lanu avodah as Beis Hamikdash, the Eibush should bring back the avodah of the Beis Hamikdash to its place. B'meheira v'yameinu amin selam. Says the Rebbe more specifically, there's an advantage in the way Pesach has fallen out this year. When Pesach has fallen out on Shabbos, and therefore Sfira, Mimocharas HaShabbos, the day following Shabbos, which usually we translate it as the day following the first day of Pesach, but here it's also in the literal sense. We start on Motzei Shabbos on Sunday. So then, the weeks are also considered complete weeks in the order of the week, because we start every week of Sfira on a Sunday, finishing on Shabbos. So in that way, looking at the Spheros, every week finishes with Malchus. First Shabbos is going to be Malchus Shebe Chesed, then Malchus Shebe Gevura, the next Malchus Shebe Tiferes, etc. Now, Shabbos, of course, is connected to the idea of Geula. We call Shabbos is representing the Yom Shekuloi Shabbos or Menucha L'Chayei Olamim. It's symbolic of the ultimate Shabbos that's going to be when Mashiach comes. If that's the case, we understand that the idea of the Geula of Shabbos is even more emphasized when we have the idea of Malchus in Shabbos. Because Malchus, of course, refers to the Malchus of Beis David, Mashiach's Malchus, which is going to be coming out perfectly, completely, when Mashiach comes. And then the Malchus of the Eibishter will be revealed in the whole world, as the Pasuk says, V'hoysel Hashem Amlucha, V'hoy Hashem L'melech Al Kol Haaretz. To explain this further, Malchus in the context of Geula, which is Melech HaMashiach, represents the strength of the idea of Geula. Malchus represents strength without any sort of hindrances, blockages, etc. As the Chazal say, Omar Malka Okar Turav, the king says that a mountain gets uprooted. There's a special strength in a Melech. That means even the greatest opposition, a mountain, will be removed through the Melech. On a deeper level, since the vitality, the whole existence of all the people in the country and all matters of the country are all dependent on the Melech, it's understood that in truth nothing could really oppose the Melech, because the whole Metzias, the whole existence of the opposition, even though externally he seems like an opponent, but he's really himself dependent completely on the king. In a similar way regarding the Indian of Geula, the idea of Malchus, of Melech HaMashiach, emphasizes that really there's nothing in the world in Golus that could really oppose the union of Geula, because the whole idea of the world is dependent on the Geula, on the idea of Malchus. As the Gemara says, Lo Ivri Alma, the whole world was created for Mashiach, so nothing could really be in opposition to Mashiach. And therefore any opposition of the world, of the Golus to the Geula, is really only external. And the way to nullify it is, as we explained before, to reveal what it's really all about. That it's all really about the Indian of Malchus, the Indian of Mashiach, etc. Now, if Malchus is Mashiach, within the revelation of Malchus itself, the Malchus of the Eibishter through Melech HaMashiach, within this itself there could be a number of different ways. There's Malchus as it is in each one of the 7 meters. There's Malchus Sheba Chesed, Malchus Sheba Gevura, Malchus Sheba Tiferes, Malchus Sheba Netzach, Malchus Sheba Hoyd, Malchus Sheba Yesoid, and of course Malchus Sheba Malchus. So now let's have a look at what Rebbe says. Rebbe says, what's the Derech HaYeshara to bring Mashiach, as we explained this Mishnah before? We understand now what the idea and the special union of Malchus of this week, of Malchus Shebetiferes, which the Rebbe will soon go on to explain more what that means. Furthermore, we don't even have to wait for the continuation of the other Shabbosim of Sfiras Omer, because really, once you have Malchus Shebetiferes, we said before, the Derech HaYeshara, the straight path, is Kol Shi Tiferes. Now Tiferes, Chassidus explains, is that like the Bria Chatichoy, the middle pole in the Mishkan that went from one extreme, from one end, all the way to the other. In Chassidus, this is explained as Tiferes, going from the highest level, reaching down to the lowest level. So once you have the union of Malchus Shebet Tiferes, once you have the Tiferes aspect, really that automatically brings about the revelation of all the other ideas of Malchus as well. As in the Malchus that's from Netzach, which would represent the victory of the king over all matters of the world that are concealing over Mashiach in a Chitzoni as the way. It brings about the Malchus Shabahoid, meaning the glory, the beauty of the king, as we're supposed to see a king in his full glory and beauty. Malchus Shabi Yesoid, meaning Yesoid in the sense of foundation, that the Malchus of Mashiach is in a very strong and permanent way. And Malchus Shaba Malchus, the Gilui of, as we say, Malchuscha, Malchus, Kol Olamim, the greatest, deepest level of Malchus of Hashem, the way it's higher than the Tzimtzum, the way it's connected to Keser, is revealed into all of the worlds. And in a way of Malchus, Chassidus explains there's a difference between Malchus and Memshala. Malchus, kingship, is Umalchusoi Berotzoi Kiblu Aleim, when we accept them, when the world is accepting Hashem willingly, as opposed to Memshala, which is in a way against someone's will. So we have, again, just to summarize the point that Rebbe is saying, is once we have Malchus Shebet Tiferes, really automatically it brings about all the other aspects of Malchus as well. Practically speaking, what does this all mean? Says the Rebbe in Sif Yud Beis, to explain the Derech Yeshara, the straight path, to bring about the revelation and the coming of Mashiach through Malchus Shebet Tiferes. Practically, What this means is as follows. But by first prefacing, since Moshiach Tzidkenu is about to come immediately, but practically didn't come yet, therefore we need to have that last little bit of effort, like Soif Levusha, like by the Mitzoyro we said, the edge of the garments, of each and every Yid to bring Moshiach. There needs to be the pu'ula, the activities that we need to do is not Malchus itself, pure Malchus, which that's Mashiach himself. We need to have Malchus Shebet Tiferes, meaning to say, we said Malchus is Mashiach, Tiferes is Torah. So what does Malchus Shebet Tiferes mean? Mashiach as he is in Torah. As we said before, that through Torah, which that's one of the inyanim of Mashiach, we said he's a Rabbi, teaches Torah. Through Torah we bring about these great oiros of the Geula, the idea of Mashiach as a Melech, and bringing it down in a pnimiyistic way. Simply what this means is, if Tiferes is Limud HaTorah, Malchus we said is Mashiach. So Malchus Shebet Tiferes would mean learning Torah in matters of Melech HaMashiach and in matters of Geula, which these things are explained in many, many places. And the Rebbe very kindly helps us in Ha'ara 110. The Rebbe tells us how to find them also. The Rebbe says these days it's very, very easy. We have so many books, Sifrei HaMafteches, books of indexes in our generation. You just look it up in the order of the Aleph base. And the Rebbe, in his kindness, goes even further. He even tells us where to look. Look under the entries of Geula and Mashiach, etc. And the Rebbe in the Sikha further points out exactly where we need to look. First of all, in Torah Shabiksav, to use the words of the Rambam, specifically in the words of the Nevi'im, which the Rambam says, Kol HaSfarim, all the Sfarim are filled with the matter of Mashiach. Learning Torah Shabbal Peh, Gemara, specifically Masechta Sanhedrin and Masechta Soita, and the Masechta Soita. Medrashim, the Rebbe says. More specifically, Pnimiyis HaTorah, starting with Sefer HaZoyer, as it says that with the Sefer HaZoyer we're going to go out of the Golos with Rachamim. More specifically, Torah Chassidus, we know that the Mashiach is going to come, Mashiach Futzuma and Asecha Chutzah, that's when Mashiach comes, in the Torah of our Rabbeim. And now the Rebbe says, and specifically, the Torah, the Maimorim and Lekutei Sichos of Nesi Doreinu, all of this as a preparation, and similar to learning the Torah of Mashiach, the Torah Chadasha, the new dimensions of Torah that are going to be revealed when Mashiach comes, that Mashiach is going to be teaching all of the Yidden, Pnimiyas HaTorah, the secrets of the Torah, the reasons of the Torah, Yediyas Elikus, knowledge and godliness, Das Elokei Avicha, as the Rambam paskins that at that time Yidden will be great Chachamim and know all the secrets and know the knowledge of the Creator, etc. Says the Rebbe, adding in Limud HaTorah in matters of Mashiach and Geula, which we just said that what Malchus Shebet Tiferes means, this is the Derech Yishara, this is the straightest path to bring about the revelation of the coming of Mashiach and Geula, B'Poyel Mamash. Says the Rebbe in Seif Yud Gimel, V'al Shel Poyel Bossi, that I want to bring this down all practically down to earth, and surely this will be publicized and spoken about in every single place in order to bring about the Isgalus, the revelation and the coming of Mashiach immediately. It is upon each and every Yid, both men, and this includes Yoshvei Yoel, those that sit and learn like Yisachar, and the businessmen like Zvulun, so to women and children, each person according to their own level needs to add in learning Torah specifically in matters of Mashiach and Geula. Better yet, it should actually be learned barabim, ba'asara, with a minyan. Because in addition to the advantage of always whenever 10 Yidden are sitting and learning Torah together, the Shekhinah is there, there's a specific advantage when we're learning matters of Mashiach and Geula barabim, as far as the excitement that's going on when you have a rabbi, many people learning together, the simcha, the joy and the feelings of the heart, which that of course will bring about a greater anticipation and yearning for the Geula and for Mashiach. And therefore the Rebbe clarifies in 119, in footnote 119, therefore even those that perhaps want to learn more in depth and in a way of shaklavataria, discussing it back and forth and coming up with chidushim in matters of Mashiach and Geula, and for that you might need to sit by yourself to be able to be relaxed and calm, learning by yourself, or at most with a chavrusa. So there's a certain advantage learning by yourself. Nevertheless, even they should try at times to participate in learning with a minyan, so that they too should have this mila of learning with 10 people. Says the Rebbe further in the Sikha, and most importantly, simply, of course, adding in the fulfillment of mitzvahs behidur, specifically in the mitzvah of tzedakah to be mahader, as we know that tzedakah is the general of all the mitzvahs. Tzedakah is mekareves esagula, and the Rebbe says it's very appropriate to connect the addition in tzedakah with the addition of learning Torah and matters of Mashiach Gula. How do we do that? That when we are giving tzedakah, we should have kavanah to hasten the Gula. So this kavanah itself is part of learning about Gula, because you're learning in your thought from time to time the Maimer Chazal G'doyla Tzedakah Shemekareves Esagula. Concludes the Rebbe in Seif Yudalet V'yehi Rotzen, that the Achlata and all of the above should hasten and bring immediately the ultimate purpose, the Isgalus and Bias HaMashiach B'poil Mamash Teka from the Yad Mamash. Simply speaking, that on this Shabbos Kodesh of Parsha Isha Kisazriya V'yolda Zohar and Zois Tia Torah Sametzoyra B'yom Ta'arasi, even before we read the Torah in Mincha, that is, and especially before we learn the Pirkei Avos in Mincha, we should already have the Leida, the birth and the Isgalus of Mashiach Tzidkenu, which we called him before, the Metzoyra from the house of Rebbe, as he is B'yom Ta'arasi, when he becomes purified. That we are Zoichet to hear the Achroza, the announcement in the whole world and in all of Seder Ishtalshalos, that He Nezeh, that we could point with our fingers and say, here is Mashiach, He Nezeh Melech HaMashiach Bo, and here is Kvoit Kedushas Moiri V'chami Admur Nesido Reinu. Because of course we're going to have our Kitzu V'rananu Shoich Ne'ofar, those that are resting in the dust will get up and sing, etc. And Tzaddikim are going to have Tchias HaMeisim immediately. And all of our Rabbeim, and all the Tzaddikim, and all the Nesiyei Yisrael, along with Moshe and Aaron, together with all the Bnei Yisrael, with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters. As the Pasuk says, Oida Kabetz Olav, I'm going to gather all the Yidden together, from Asher and from Mitzrayim and from the islands. We're going to come with the clouds of heaven to our holy land, to Yerushalayim, Ira Kodesh, to the Beis HaMikdash, which is a Beis Tfilo Yikari L'chol Amim, a place where all nations are going to gather to come daven. To the Kodesh HaKadoshim, as we're going to read in the Parsha by Mincha, Bezois Yovai Aaron El HaKodesh, the Kohen Gadol goes into Yom Kippur, to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And here the Rebbe says an amazing thing, that La'asid Lovi, not only Aaron, but each and every Yid is going to be on the level of Koyanim G'dolim, as the Eibishter calls us Mamleches Koyanim, and this means Koyanim G'dolim. Every single Yid, and not only on Yom Kippur, but any time we'll want to be able to go into Kodesh HaKadoshim, we'll be able to. That all of this happens, but poyel mamish, down to earth, in a way that we could already thank and make the bracha for the birth and revelation of Mashiach, the bracha of Shechiyonu v'kimonu v'higiyonu lizman hazeh. And the Rebbe points out in Hara 135 that the word v'higiyonu, which literally means that Hashem made us reach this time, could also be translated from the word of negiah, that not only we could point, but we can mamish even touch already the whole inyan of Mashiach and the Geula, all of this immediately.